Thank you for listening to SPN, the Savage Podcasting Network.
You're listening to the Stephen Savage Show on the Savage Podcasting Network. And now here's your host, film and television director, Stephen Savage.
Thanks, Andrea, and hello, everyone. Savage here with you for the first episode of the 2024 season of the Stephen Savage Show, the official podcast of the Idyllwild International Festival of Cinema, coming to you from the newly revamped and renamed Cranium Wheel Studios in the picturesque village of Idyllwild, California, just 2 hours east of Los Angeles, but a world away at over 5,000 feet, high atop beautiful Mount San Jacinto, and overlooking the great Coachella Valley. And speaking of the Idyllwild Cinema Festival, it's coming at us pretty quick here, March 5th through the 10th, and you can get all the info you'll ever need at the festival website, idyllwildcinemafest.com. All right, so let's get into my very special first guest of the year. He's one of my favorite people, and you'll know why in a minute. He's returning to the podcast for a second time, which is a score for us. He's an actor and writer who in the past has taken the plunge into the directing world as well. And you'll know his work in such films and series as Halloween 2, Children of the Corn Genesis, Dusk Till Dawn 2, which I believe he co-wrote with Scott Siegel and, if I remember, Boaz Yakin, I think, was the other writer, a couple of really prominent guys in Hollywood. He was in the original Roseanne series. I think he did a turn for an episode or two. And, of course, his iconic turn as Maynard, the pawn shop owner in Quentin Tarantino's classic Pulp Fiction, of which we're doing a special 30th anniversary screening at Idyllwild this March with a Q&A afterwards with myself and today's guests, and I'm excited about that. And I'm happy to say this man and I will be working together very shortly on my newest film, which I'll talk about in a later episode just before we go into the production, but not quite yet. And he's back now to talk about screenwriting and a little bit about directing and all things both indie film and the Hollywood mainstream, which he's walked that fine line between for many years, so he knows. And I'm glad to have him here again today, Mr. Duane Whitaker. Duane, how are you, buddy?
Hey, man, how's it going?
Life is groovy. Can't complain, but sometimes I still do, you know.
Both the great Joe Walsh.
Yep. One of my heroes. So I'm going to give you a little more volume here. You've done a lot of sequels as I'm naming them off, you know. I love that. It's just great. But
well, it's weird. I got into Sequelville because Jeff Burr was one who unfortunately just passed away recently. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I got involved. You know, he was doing sequels, and I was doing a lot of films with him. I ended up doing I think five or six films for him. Uh-huh. And you know, I think the first one was actually, I think I did looping a bunch of ADR work on Stepfather 2, so I wasn't technically. But then the first thing I did for him was Chainsaw 3, and then I did Puppet Master 5. You know, so he told me, you know, he had done a movie called Night of the Scarecrow, which I came in and worked on, and he said he took the movie for two reasons. One, it didn't have a number after the title, and two, it didn't have a number after the title. So that was, but yeah, no, I've actually been. Somebody did a bio on some festival, not festival, I'm having a brain freeze already.
That's right.
Like a convention, you know, mm-hmm. And they had done a bio, and it said I was part of no less than 8 horror franchises, right? And I was like, wow, that's news to me.
It's so funny when you find out things about yourself. I did an interview a couple years ago with the great songwriter Candy Parton, and she had a song on a Sinatra album that she didn't even know about. I had to tell her.
Yeah, I remember you telling me that. Yeah, it's you know, I mean, sometimes, I mean, you can look the stuff up now, but you know, a lot of times I can't remember some movie that I did, or I mean, some of them I've never. It's so weird because in the beginning, you know, we barely had VCRs, but man, if I was on TV or something, I have literally 3 people taping it for me, and then I would have a professional, they call them air checks. I would have, if it was some 2-line part on it. I mean, and a lot of times now, I mean, there's still some stuff I've never seen that's out there. I'm just like,
Well, many people would kill to be able to say, yeah, I've been in all this many franchises. I mean, it's a great thing to your career the way you've navigated Hollywood in such a unique way. I admire you, man. I think it's great.
Well, I appreciate that. The thing is, somebody asked me this in an interview years and years ago, and they said, well, how did you kind of like decide this path or whatever? And a guy that I didn't know at the time, who I kind of know now because we have the same manager, was Bruce Davison, a wonderful actor. And I saw they asked him in some interview, they said, well, how do you choose your parts? And he said, I just go where I'm kicked. and I thought that was pretty good, so I stole it, and I said it in this interview, and I felt guilty about it for all those years. I thought, man, I shouldn't have stole Bruce's line, and when we finally kind of, like, I don't know if we're friends, but we're acquainted, because we have some common ground there, and we've talked a bunch of times, and finally I just came clean. It was like at a breakfast meeting my manager had. I said, Bruce, I got to tell you, man, I feel really terrible about this. I stole a line from this interview, and it's always bothered me. And he said, well, what was it? I said, well, they asked me how I chose my roles and stuff. And I said, I just go where I'm kicked. And Bruce said, he goes, hey, man, don't worry about it. He goes, I stole that from Sam Peckinpah. But yeah, it's kind of true. I mean, I've kind of gone where I was kicked, I mean, we'll talk about the writing thing is one of the things that kind of caused me to move in certain directions and sent me on like different paths, was because of the writing. But, I was never in a position, I mean, I was lucky enough to be working, once I started. It took me forever. I really didn't start. I came to LA in like the end of 79. I really didn't start doing TV and films like 86. I mean, I was doing a bunch of theater, so I was slow moving to get started, and I wasn't in a position really ever where I could turn down a lot of stuff, So if it wasn't an insulting amount of money, or I still do turn down stuff. It's usually the material, like something so bad. And sometimes, I have the landlord. This guy shows up every month. In fact, I just got a note from him. Every month this guy wants money. So, it's crazy. So certainly, I just posted a quote which I'd never seen before. An English actor had posted, again, I'm having a brain freeze, Dracula, Christopher Lee. And he had apparently was quoted as saying, all actors go through periods where they have to do bad movies, and the secret is not to be bad in them. Which I think is pretty good. That's and good. I said, I don't know if I've always succeeded at that, but I've always tried, and so, I mean, yeah, it really is kind of, I've had a little bit of control of it, but I a lot of it's just kind of, playing the cards I was dealt, and sometimes those have been really good cards, and sometimes they've not been so good, so it's a weird, I mean, I'm just grateful to be, to continue to work all this time. I mean, like, of all the people I started with, like, say, going back to the early 80s, there's only 2 or 3 of us still standing.
Sure.
So it's the attrition rate is, is very, very, very high. So it doesn't go past me. I'm not one of those people that's like, well,
yeah,
it was all meant to be. Maybe it was, but I have the fact that, that I'm still at it, and still working and making a living at it. It's no small feat. I don't take it for granted at all.
Yeah, and that's the attitude to have. And what cracks me, it's people that'll say things like, just dumb things about a career, and especially like when you're doing Q&A and press and all that stuff, and it's some of the stupidest comments are from people. I remember getting a little peeved one time. I can't remember which film festival it was, but I was doing Q&A on a movie which already had distribution, and I was flying high on that, and some guy says, "Oh, you think this was a little ambitious for you?" And I just kind of looked at it, where's your fucking movie? It was one of those things. It was like, how hard it is to make a movie, and you sit there in a chair and writing down the BS you're going to write about it, and you have the gall to ask me if it was too ambitious.
There are the people who yak, and there are people who do it, and it's I was always, somebody was always, taking shots at me of like people are like, "Oh yeah, you're just doing stupid TV," and whatever you're doing, they're gonna attack because they're not doing anything, But I was always, I was just happy to be working. Like I said, I read for a TV show years ago. I want to say 2000. It was a cold case episode, which I ended up getting probably the best thing I ever did in TV. It was a really nice guest star, which I didn't get to do a lot of in TV, but this was a particularly good part because it was something I wouldn't even normally have been read for, but they kind of made a mistake, and the long story. But anyway, I ended up reading for this part, and I did the reading, and in the room it was just the writer / producer and the casting director and the director. It was just us, and I was the last guy in. Man, they had read like a gazillion people, and at the end they kind of indicated they were going to hire me, and we were just chatting, and the producer said, would it be okay? He's looking at my race. He said, "Could we talk about Pulp Fiction for a few minutes?" Mm-hmm. And I said, "Hey man, it took me 15 years to get into a movie that anybody saw, so I'll talk about it all you want." Which is my standard response, because for something like that to happen, getting onto the Pulp thing, that's a small miracle, To be a part of something like that caught a critical wave and a financial wave and all that stuff at once. I've always said if I had a choice to be in any movie the last 30 years, it would, if I could just go, what movie do I want to be? It would have been that or Boogie Nights, and I'm actually in it. So that's kind of cool.
Yeah, that's very cool. And I just look at, I have friends like you, journeyman actors who've just been at it and just, crash through any wall or any speed bump that's in front of them. And I just admire people like you. But it's funny, as I'm listening to you talk, I'm almost said what I say to you a lot. We talk on the phone quite a bit, and I'm always saying to you, hold that thought for when you're on the podcast next, because I want these insightful monologues and dialogues to go out to my audience. So I'm listening to you going, "Oh, I got to tell them to wait, we really are on the podcast, so it's okay, talk away." We've
my ex-girlfriend didn't think I was amusing or interesting at all, so this is great.
We covered a lot of your acting stuff the last time you were on, so I'll just ask everyone to refer back to that show, which I'll post as an archive episode a couple of days after this one comes out, because I'd like people to hear that one if they haven't already in the past. But today, as we said, I want to talk about screenwriting pretty much, if you don't mind. But first,
sure, yeah.
I'd like to explain to all just what it is I like about Duane, aside from his acting and his screenwriting and his unique insights into the industry. And that's the fact that, like myself, a few of my favorite people in the industry, they're all sort of throwbacks to the old man's man era of Hollywood, for better or worse, whatever you're into today. Back to the hard-drinking, hard-talking artist dudes in the vein of, Bogart and John Huston and Orson Welles, John Ford, Paul Robeson, and Burt Lancaster. I could go on. And my closest male friends in the business are people who fall into that category. My friend Angus McFadden, who the great Scottish actor who I've staggered down many a Edinburgh and London street with on a few good pub crawls. And there's a mentor of mine, you may know, Duane, director Alan J. Levy. Another early mentor of mine was producer Mike Motor, who we just lost recently. And I got a bit choked up when they did the memorial video at the Oscars this past year, and Mike's picture came up. He was one of the last of the old school great ones. But I'm happy to say that you fall into that category, and there's a growing number of my buddies in Hollywood who are falling into that old school masculine energy, which is starting to make a comeback. So thanks for being one of those guys for me. I just wanted to say that.
I'm trying to uncover my feminine side. I just can't find it. It's there somewhere. But yeah, I'm kind of I grew up in Texas, so it was it was kind of although I'm not much of a drinker anymore, but yeah, it was a different thing, it was a different. I mean, I thought everybody, I thought everybody like got in fights and shit. That's just the way. It's like, oh, what, and you're beating the hell out of each other. Sometimes people that you were friends with, so it wasn't that big of a deal. Like I think violence, particularly. I mean, that's why violence in movies never really, because it's not real violence. It never really bothered me, And I mean, I would look at something that people think in real life was like the worst thing ever, and I would like, man, I saw worse fights than that, like in junior high or something.
Right.
So yeah, it is a different world we live in now. It's not, nobody would shoot you or stab you, or it's not just that, but I mean, it's just, that whole, it's a whole different thing. I don't know if there's like, I always like joke, it always like there is some kind of a de-balling thing going on there.
Yep.
Like the last
and who's hating it as much as anyone is strong women. They're saying, "What's wrong with the strong man?"
Exactly.
And some of the best, the greatest women I know today working in the industry are all like, "What's the problem here?" And
it's like the definition of a strong woman in film. It's like, oh, if some woman comes in and kicks some guy in the balls, it's like that. Oh, that's a strong woman. Really? That's the best you can do.
Yeah, right.
I just think there's a whole, I know films are fantasy. We were just having a conversation about this the other day. When some kid, young women are watching, some woman's beating up 3 guys in an alley or something. You see that enough time, you think that's reality. But this whole idea that this woman recently was a friend of mine. She was going to walk to her car, and he said, "Well, let me watch." She goes, "No, I can take care of myself." And it's like, well, no, you can't. I mean, if a 250-pound guy, hits you, it's going to break your jaw and knock out a bunch of your teeth. It's not. It's over. There's nothing you can do about that. You know what I mean? So I think there's some kind of like disconnect with reality. It's with all this gender bending and all that stuff. And even speaking of strong women, Martina Navratilova, who's like come out against it. She's like, no, you can't let men play women's sport. It's just common.
Serena Williams has come out and
and you talk about strong women. Even they're like, well, wait a minute, let's not.
Ronda Rousey is the same way. She go, "What are you talking about? You people are so delusional, man." So
no, they were even saying that when Ronda Rousey was before she got beat, and they said, "Well, she could beat a man of her own weight, and that might have killed her." I mean, it's just a different physicality and everything, and to make to try to make them the same, they're not the same.
And
what
pisses me off is when people say stuff like that. How is Ronda Rousey coming out in favor of women and men, women in women's sports? How is her coming out like that, demeaning her accomplishments, or Serena Williams in any way? It's not. These are amazing athletes, and I couldn't go out on the tennis court and do anything but sweat against.
Well, no, John McEnroe went on The View and got in trouble for.
Yeah.
He said, "Oh, she's the best women's player," and they go, "Why do you have to qualify?" And he said, "Well, because she's not the, the truth is, I mean, he even kind of watered, and the truth is, a really, really good, a decent college player would beat Serena, but they've done that a few times, and she's even said, if you watch her play mixed doubles, she said, a guy serves her and she just screams and jumps out of the way. That's not demeaning her at all. They're two different sports, so that's why you have to qualified and say, yes, she is the best women's tennis player in the history of the sport. I would agree with that. And I know a lot about tennis, and I have no problem with that statement. But just to say she's the best tennis player without qualifying, I mean, it doesn't even make any sense. So
and all of a sudden
we better get off this subject. We'll get.
I know, but all of a sudden it becomes political, and you go, why is this even a controversy?
Right? It's just common sense. It's not any. You're not really going out. I mean, people can get mad or not, but it's just,
What needs to happen, those people need to stop apologizing for having common sense. So on my show, people say whatever they want to say, and I'm not apologizing to anybody. So
it's just, there's nothing very radical about that.
The film festival, the Idyllwild Film Festival, it's funny. So we posted a thing, say the Idyllwild Film Festival will always stand with Israel. Man, all these people came at us, and I finally just wrote a mass email and just said, screw you. I don't care. Have your thoughts. Fight for your right to have them. But I'm not apologizing to you for anything. And
of course not.
And so what I've done, instead of getting all radical, and we've renamed a couple of our awards at Idyllwild. The screenwriting awards are now reflecting my pushback on this man-hating vibe. Now, the awards for screenwriting are now going to be called the John Milius Screenwriting Awards. Another, and we have a new category which I just invented, and it's going to be the John Ford Trophy for the most traditional American film. And that's just my pushback, going, you don't want to be involved in my festival. We had over 460 submissions this year. I'm not going to be hurting if 3 bow out because I've got a John Ford Award.
Well, that's the thing, though. People get afraid, like somebody brings, they're like, and people get afraid that, and that's why that's the reason. A lot of this crap is just based on fear, that if we don't kowtow to everybody, you got to have this pronoun, you can't say this, and it's got to be, it's like it have to be that.
It's just the apology thing is like giving milk to a stray cat. It's just going to keep coming back, and so I'm going to stick to my Lee Marvin.
It's like people get up in the morning. I can't remember, it's Wayne Dyer or somebody said, a lot of people just get up in the morning and they start looking for something to complain about. Yeah. and in this environment, this kind of, you can get by with that. No matter what you do.
Yeah.
It's like, you're a misogynist or you're a racist or whatever.
And those words mean nothing anymore because they're just so spewed out, and it's like that.
It's thrown out there immediately. Without any thought to it, or you're the one you're a hater.
Yeah.
No, I'm not a hater. I just didn't agree with what you said.
Although there are a lot of things I hate, and I'm happy to let you know what they are.
Exactly.
So yeah, you're right. Let's get out of our.
So we're doing before we get to the right. So we're doing the pulp thing, correct?
So I'm going to set you up with a nice place to stay, and we'll go out and have a bite, and then the last screening on Saturday night will be the Pulp Fiction thing, and we'll just show it, and then we'll sit down on stage and
we'll chat about that. Yeah, I've done. It's I don't really know what happened to that film. It just kind of got lost in the shuffle, but we'll talk about it.
Yeah, it's and while we're talking, we'll talk a lot about your foray into screenwriting, and so so let's get into that sort of thing. And
so the whole writing thing, I've always said that I kind of wrote out of self-defense because my
that's good.
My acting career was never. It was always, I always felt like I was 5 or 10 years behind. I thought I was 5 years behind when I showed up in LA. But the fact is, I was always writing. I was writing plays. Really, I actually wrote a screenplay real early on, which I never showed anyone. I'm kind of glad I didn't, because I think it would have gotten made. Actually, it was a perfect time for that kind of. It was like a teen comedy with adults. It was called Rainbow Blue,
mm-hmm.
which is a good title. I can't remember where I got that, but and somehow I had in my mind. I was just thinking. I had in my mind that you weren't. I didn't know how to type,
Mm-hmm.
and I had in my mind that you couldn't be a writer if you didn't know how to type. I don't know where that is, because my image was a guy like in the typewriter. And then I saw some showing screenwriters, and it had all these people. It had William Goldman and Neil Simon. It might have been Neil Simon. And it showed him writing, and this guy's like he's like, with one finger. And I was like, well, hell, I can type better than that. Maybe that's not maybe that doesn't have anything to do with it. Because, I was, back then I wrote everything in long. Yeah, I wrote a screenplay, and I was playing in a band at the time, which is a whole nother story. But I stumbled into this band, and I was playing bass, played with them for about 3 years, and I ended up moving into our studio. It had a little, we had a walk-away studio with a little apartment, and I ended up living there. So it was kind of my day job, because as long as I was in the band, I got this apartment really cheap in Hollywood.
Cool.
It was kind of like, it didn't really pay much. I think the most we were ever paid was not to play. They were shooting a movie up the street, and they gave us $100 to not play, $100 a man. So that was probably, that was probably our best gig,
Right.
I think my first movie I got fired from before I ever started, and then I got paid like $1,700. So it's the most I'd ever made to act, and I never acted, but had nothing to do with me. It's just they had fired the director, and then the new director had fired everybody that he had hired. It was just a big mess. But anyway, I wrote a play about the band rehearsing which I don't know. I did a stage reading of it once. It was kind of cool. It was called Dick Boy and the Rhythm Method, which is kind of a cool title. And then I wrote a companion piece with that, which there were 2 one-acts designed to be done the same night. And the other was about an acting class, which I don't even remember that much about it, but I ended up using that for other stuff. I kind of plagiarized for myself later. And then I wrote a play called Waiting for Mickey, which was about a guy, it's kind of loosely based on my comes, but a guy waiting for Mickey Rourke to show up in this Hollywood bar. As with all waiting plays, Mickey doesn't show. But that got produced. I directed it. I wasn't in it, and that got produced in a little theater in Burbank. It did okay. And I ended up writing this play with this guy named Dan Zukovic and his brother. He was like this guerrilla theater guy. This was in '87. And we ended up just writing this thing. I always say we wrote it on napkins. We did. It's not quite true, but I don't think we ever had like a full script. And it was called Who Killed Orson Welles? And great title, which his brother came up with. I think that's why he got writing credit on that play. But it had nothing to do with Orson Welles. But it was a great title, and we did this thing. The budget of this play was $170, which we stole from my cousin at work. And my ex-girlfriend had a theater at the time that her boyfriend owned, and somehow I finagled her into letting us have it for like $50 a night or something. And this play was a hit. And, it was such a weird experience. I mean, that somehow, for some reason, the LA Times reviewed it, and it gave it a great review, and so it sold out the whole run, which was, we had like 25 seats or something. But it was just one of those weird experiences, and we could have kept going, but we decided, we better stop before they figure out, we're full of shit here. And we weren't even sure it was a play, but we were getting all these great reviews, and it was voted one of the 10 best new plays in LA in 1987, I think. And I think it was like number 8 or something. And so that was kind of that was the first time I'd ever done like full blown like guerrilla theater. This guy had done this like same thing in New York and everything. And so that was kind of a cool experience. And then after that, I wrote this play called Seminar, which is a one-man show, which I certainly didn't write for myself. I offered it to a couple of actors, and they both turned it down because they thought they couldn't do it. They both liked the play, and one of them is still a friend of mine. He said, I really should have done it. He goes, I would have been way over my head, but I should have tried it. Mm-hmm. But it ended up getting produced by a little theater company, a friend of mine, and I just let him. I just thought the guy was way too young to play the part, so they did. I said, you can do like a 3-performance thing with no reviews or anything. And I went and saw it, watched it, and it was really good, mm-hmm. And I thought about doing something with that as a film, but I never got really a grip on it. And but the thing that really changed everything was I had seen, it ended up changing everything. I certainly didn't know it at the time, but I was bartending back in Lubbock, Texas, before I moved here, obviously. And I was at this bar, and about once every 3 months, this guy would come through. He was this Elvis impersonator, and he did the show upstairs in the big bar, and they would have me go up there and help out because it was really busy. And this guy was this Elvis impersonator who he wasn't really good. He was kind of mediocre, and he was a good looking guy, and he'd actually changed his last name to Presley legally.
Wow.
And he would come through, and I was up there, and he would tell his story, and his story was basically, he was kind of this, successful like junior executive or something, and he was doing really well, and he had a wife and kid, and everything was going well, but he was just really unhappy, and he realized that, he wanted to be an Elvis impersonator, so he quit. He quit his job to do this, and his wife turned on him, and his family turned on him. They all kind of, at one, you can understand, and he was just saying, they all kind of like just, threw him aside, and like didn't talk to him anymore or anything. And the wife divorced him and I thought, what an interesting story.
What a great movie.
Yeah, and I was, at that point I wasn't even thinking, Yeah. So years later, I'm in LA, again, I'm always looking to do something, and I was reading and writing a lot. I was working a security guard job. That was my, my day job, graveyard. So I was usually by myself all night in an empty building, and I worked all over. I worked at Capitol Records and EMI all these different kind of empty places. Mm-hmm. And I kept thinking about this Elvis impersonator. And at that point, I was in a really kind of weird position as an actor. I was really frustrated with I was day playing and doing bad movies. I was really having trouble making any progress as an actor. I wasn't quite making a living at it, really, And even though I was working, I had an agent, and I was booking like network TV and an occasional movie. But I was like, I kind of came to this crossroads where I was like, am I going to be okay with this if I'm driving a cab? I was probably thinking at that time 35 or 40 years old, just so I can still do this. Am I going to be able to live with that? And the answer was yes, but it was not an easy. I thought, well, I'm in this or I'm not.
Yep.
As they said to Parkland, don't get off the boat. And so I was like, well, but that was sort of my mentality. And I'm like, so I kept thinking about this Elvis impersonator as sort of a metaphor for where my life was at the time, mm-hmm. But I just didn't, and it was as a one-man show, and I wasn't really a big fan of one-man shows. I'd seen a couple, but I was like, you got to be really interesting one guy on stage for however long. It was just not something that generally appealed to me,
Right.
And I kept thinking, I said, well, it's a performance, and he gets up there, and something goes drastic, and running the whole thing through my head, but I couldn't come up with why the performance was important. Because just having a guy, you know, a mediocre Elvis impersonator on stage for an hour, I mean, sure, I mean, I think it would have been amusing, I guess, you know, but it wasn't some, I just thought there was something missing. I just didn't have the hook. And I was having lunch at McDonald's on Hollywood Boulevard with a friend of mine. And this guy, he was a street performer. He was a magician, you know, and he was kind of crazy. And he had obviously picked up a cup off the street and walked in with this empty coffee cup and put it down and asked for a refill. And the girl behind the counter said, "No, I can't do that." And they went back and forth. And this guy had an absolute meltdown. He just cleared the counter. He's throwing shit, screaming, slobbering and screaming and kicking. And the cops came and kind of, as we used to say, tuned him up a little bit. And, chained him up and drug him out of there. And as they were taking him out, I was like, "Oh, wow, that's it. There it is." This guy snapped. He's been in a mental institution for like a year. And this is the first time he's been able to this is his first performance after all this shit happening. And I'm like, all right, now I'm on to something.
Yeah, that's good.
And I went in, it might have been that night. If it wasn't that night, it was the next night. I went to my guard job and I sat down, and I still had to do my little rounds every hour. Mm-hmm. And it was at EMI Records, EMI America. And I sat there and wrote that play in 8 hours.
Wow.
And I mean, I'm like laughing and crying, and I'm like, man, this is fucking great, you know? And I thought, man, maybe I've lost my mind, you know? So I called a friend of mine who was a director and a writer at like 8 a.m. when I said, "Can you meet me at Denny's? And I want you to read something. I just wrote it, it's in longhand." I said, "Just read this and see if you think there's something here." So we go to Denny's, and he starts writing, and he's laughing and crying and screaming. And I'm like, all right, well, maybe I'm onto something. And then I was involved in a theater company who was doing all this crazy theater, which was really what kept me sane in a lot of ways. It was just, I was in there doing sometimes way over my head, you know, just, right. They were doing insane theater. This wasn't like Showcase, you know, you're trying to get a job on a sitcom. This stuff was like, you know, hanging from the rafters, dressed up, you know, like a Nazi, screaming in German, kind of crazy shit, you know. So it was we were doing some far out there stuff, you know. But they did some normal plays, and I thought, well, I'll take them. So I took the play to him, and I had, you know, one of the people that ran it, and he called me the next day and he said, "Yeah, let's do it." That's, you know, great. It's not cost anything to produce. It's basically, at the time, it was the equivalent of like a karaoke setup, right. And a spotlight. That was it.
Right.
You know, so we rehearsed it, and I remember I just told this story. I was doing the dress rehearsal, and we didn't have the suit or anything yet. You know, this was, and so we were going to do a run through of it and just have people in the company, and I had some friends coming just to see, you know, if it was going to work or not. And I was terrified. I mean, I was, you know, never done anything, you know, standing on stage there for an hour and going through all this cathartic stuff. I mean, it was a lot, you know. The play was a little different animal than the movie. It's kind of the third, we'll get to the movie part, but mm-hmm. it was kind of more confrontational, you know, with the audience. It was not, people thought they were going to come and see this, you know, this idiot Elvis impersonator, and it ends up turning around on him and being like, "Hey, what are you doing with your life?" kind of thing. So it was not what people expected, you
it's
know.
More like the Joker in an Elvis costume.
No, it really was a weird thing. But anyway, so I was doing this. I was living with this girl, and we were at the tail end of our relationship. So we were quite hostile with each other, but we were still living together and talking. And I was just sitting there going over this stuff, and she could tell I was, you know, really kind of freaked out about it. And she goes, "What's going on?" I said, "Well, you know, I'm doing I'm doing a dress rehearsal. There's a lot of people there, opinions I respect. And I said, I don't have any idea if this is going to work. I mean, I wrote this in one night.
Yeah.
And I said, and I'm singing, and then this thing breaks down. Then I do this song on the guitar, which is supposed to be, I don't know how that's going to play. And I basically, I have a nervous breakdown on stage. I mean, that's what happened. And she said, well, what difference does it make? You're a failure anyway.
Uh-huh.
And, nice girl, huh? And
wow.
It was like, my first impression was like,
I'm not laughing at you, but I'm pretty much laughing at you.
No. Then I started thinking about it, and I thought, well, she's got a good point, I mean, it's not like I was Al Pacino and I was going off Broadway, sitting in this little theater, and these critics are sitting there with, with the knives out,
Mm-hmm.
I was like, I have really nothing to lose, so why am I? It's not that I wasn't still nervous, but it kind of helped.
Yeah.
And so longer story shorter, so I did the play, and it did its run, and it did okay. It did its 6 week run. It got some good reviews, and it didn't get to I don't think the Times ever. So it wasn't like what I would consider a hit. It wasn't like Who Killed Orson Welles, but I was pretty happy with it. And against all equity rules, I put a camera up one time and just, turned it on in the back of the theater and taped one of the performances. Uh-huh. And so Jeff Burr, who I worked with, was a friend of mine who I'd done a couple of things with. He had just done Chainsaw Massacre 3, and it just disappeared for a while. It was such a bad experience. I think he left the country. I don't know if he had a nervous breakdown or whatever. He might have been doing the real Eddie Presley, But he showed up out of the blue, and he said, "What have you been doing?" And I said, "Well, I did this play a while back." And he goes, and I described it. He goes, "Can I read it?" And I said, I don't know if I even have a script, but I taped it.
Right.
And because it's just me, I mean, nobody else was going to do it. And so he looked at the tape, and he was like, I don't think he didn't love the play, but he loved the idea of, wow, what led up to this?
Right.
That's interesting to see all this stuff that he's talking about. So he said, why don't we adapt it? He goes, I want to get back to independent film. Why don't we adapt this and make a really low budget movie out of it?
Right.
You star in it, you write the screenplay, and we'll shoot this thing for $70,000 and black and white 16 and see what happens. And extremely long story short, we ended up raising a little more money than that, and it became, color. Then it was, a couple $100,000,
Right.
So it became something else, which might have been to our detriment, to be honest. But we ended up making, a real movie. And we made this movie, and I left town for like 3 months and went back to Texas and starved myself because we had this whole flashback sequence where I was younger and skinnier. Mm-hmm. So I went back and starved. I lost like 40 or 50 pounds in like 90 days. Ridiculous. Mm-hmm. Kind of, we call it reverse Raging Bull. Right. And so I came back and shot that stuff, and there was a whole sequence where it shows me at the insane asylum, and we got, I didn't get it, but we got Jeff or whoever, they got Quentin Tarantino and Bruce Campbell to come down and play the abusive attendants. Right? Nice. So they're kind of boxing me around. So I'm hanging out with, I knew Bruce a little bit, but if I had met Quentin at that point, I sure don't remember it. I mean, it's possible, but I thought, and at this point, you got to understand, we shot Eddie Presley, the main unit, the same time they were shooting Reservoir Dogs. Right. So, which had caused, the script had caused such a stink. But anyway, I ended up doing, the movie did its thing, and we sold it to the Sundance Channel before anybody had it. And it played a couple of festivals. It played South by Southwest the first year they did film, which was very cool. Yeah. So, I'm out there, and it was like a, sort of like Idyllwild at that point. It wasn't like a monstrous thing that it became. I mean, the music festival was there, but it was more of a middle-sized festival then. It was like the first time they had done it. They had like 10 films in competition. showed him like 3 times. You showed up in the mixer. The first guy I saw at the mixer was Rick Linklater. And the second guy I saw was Eagle Pennell. So it was like one of those things. Like, wow, this is great.
Right. Yeah, it's good stuff.
This is a cool thing. So, excuse me, I got to take a drink here.
I'll give you time.
But anyway, so it played that. It didn't win or anything, but like I said, we sold to Sundance, and it just kind of set for a while. But in the meantime, about a year and a half later, I was in a coffee shop called Danny's Diner about 2:00 in the morning with my cousin, and we're walking out the door, and as we're walking out, and he ended up staying and said, "Hey, I got to go to the bathroom." So he went to the bathroom. I'm just standing there at the door, and I see Quentin sitting there eating a hamburger by himself, and I was like, "Oh, hey man, what's going on?" Because we had worked together the one day on Eddie, and we're talking and having a conversation about Eddie Presley and what I'd been doing, and I just done another film for another sequel, Puppet Master 5, by the way. And I said, yeah, I just did this puppet. I said, what are you up to, man? And he said, he's looking at me, and I'm way different. And, I'm sitting there in a long rider's jacket and a cowboy hat and long hair. And, he's like, I'm doing this movie. There's a part you're kind of right for. I'll have him bring you in. I was like, oh, okay, cool. I gave him my number. I don't think I even had an agent at that moment.
Right.
It's always bad agent or no agent. It was one of the. I think that was a no agent time. And sure enough, my cousin's like, you're in, man. I'm like, no, that's not how it works. And but yeah, about a week later, I got a call. They handed me a script. I didn't even go pick it up. I think about that now. They just handed the script out.
Right. Yeah.
And now it would be, you'd have to sign 17 documents to even look at the script.
Non-disclosures coming out the yin
yang.
yang.
No, man, you'd be sitting there. So they just handed me the script, and I read it, and of course, I'm not an idiot. I'm like, man, this is a great script.
Yeah.
I had no idea, whether a lot of that stuff would play, including my sequence, including the the need. I mean, you're reading that. It seems all obvious now. Oh, of course it all works. But at the time, I'm like, I don't know. Plus, it's like 160, 70 pages.
Right.
And he had final cut and everything. So, I mean, that was the movie,
Right.
It wanted it to be. And so I went in and read, and it went pretty well. He had some very smart stuff to say about how to play this stuff. And then I didn't hear anything, so I thought, well, that in the meantime, people are turning it down, and other people are reading, and they're they've got bigger fish to fry. They're all arguing over almost every part, including Travolta. Nobody wanted Travolta, and they're going through all that crap, and so I'm the least of their problems at that point. But it finally, after much torment and me coming back again, I ended up getting the part, and did the thing and had really didn't have any sense. I don't think any of us did that it was going to become what it did. And I had written Bruce Willis a letter because when I wrapped, all of a sudden I was gone and I didn't get a chance to talk to him because he was great.
Yeah.
He was great to work with, and I really learned a lot about, that guy's not only was he a movie star, he's a very good actor, and they're not always the same, but in his case, it's true.
Yeah.
And I know, I mean, I've heard stories, he was, but not on this movie.
Yeah.
I was with him the whole time.
I have that same with Michael Madsen. I've heard. Sorry, and that's like, to me, he was so respectful, and I had such a great time working. I never trust any of that crap.
No, and it very well may be true, but that doesn't mean he's going to behave.
Right.
You pay attention. If 10 people tell you something, it's probably true. But anyway, on that, and I wrote him this letter, and I sent it to his agent, and I said, if you could get this to him, I just, and so I kind of forgot about it. And the thrust of Martin was like, hey man, I enjoyed working with you. Can you get me a Die Hard 3? I think and I was in my apartment. This was right after it had won Cannes, which kind of caught my attention because none of us had seen it.
Right.
Nobody had seen it except the press.
Right.
And everybody's like, and I was just worried. I had something in my mind that they were going to cut me out, and I thought, they're not going to cut. I was with the money. We weren't going to get cut. I was next to the Willis.
Right. Yeah.
They weren't going to cut my shit, but in my mind, I'm like, oh, they could cut out and they did cut a couple of things that I wish they hadn't, but not so much. They got everything, but what the coverage was and everything, there was one shot in there. I would have like paid everything I've ever made for that shot to be in the movie, but it wasn't. But anyway, so I'm vacuuming my, carpet, which I didn't do that often, and the phone rang. I picked it up, and it's a real soft voice, and the guy's like, hey man, and I'm like, who the fuck is this? And I turn on. He goes, it's Bruce, man. It's fucking Bruce Willis. And I was like, wow. He goes, hey, man, I saw the movie. It's great. Our stuff plays great, blah, blah, blah. And I'm just thinking, this is kind of nice of him.
Yeah, very nice.
And he said, here, write down this number. He's like, this is my assistant here. He goes, this is who you call about Die Hard 3. Call them. They was in New York. He said, call them, tell them that I said to try to find something for you. And it didn't end up working out, but boy, they took the call. I'll tell you that.
Yeah, of course.
It got their attention because they didn't know what the deal was, and it turned out it was just too big. It was like one thing I could have done, and they were not going to fly me in for that. But it was very.
We're going to talk more about that. It's like I always tell you, don't, when we're talking just you and I just on a phone call, I always say, save that for the podcast. So there's so much I want to talk to you about your experiences on that film after when we do the Q&A at the 30th anniversary screening.
Absolutely.
People are going to be so interested in this, but
there's some stuff, really interesting stuff happening on the set, and all the painful stuff where I was like Mr. Travolta in a smaller set. I was not the popular choice.
Well,
and so I will always, gosh, I mean, there's no way to pay something like that. I mean, it's just life altering, But so back to the writing thing. So how does this relate to writing, you say? So after Pulp, I had written down, I was sitting around. I went through a period, where I wasn't really working. I took an acting class with my friend Kim Darby, just, which I really wanted to meet Kim Darby. So, and we ended up becoming a really good friend. And so I'm taking that class and I'm writing. And I finally, after almost a year, I did this movie called Tales from the Hood. That was like the first movie I think I did after Pulp. But in the middle of that, I had written down on a legal pad. I don't know where the hell this came from, but it sounds like a setup for a joke. I had written down, blind guy walks into a strip bar. And I had no idea. I just thought, what an interesting opening for a movie. Like, why would he be there, And I started kind of tinkering with it, writing little things, like maybe, like notes. And I think I may have wrote one little monologue or something. But a friend of mine, who you had a film he directed, it's the first time I ever went to Idyllwild, with a film called Broke Sky.
Broke Sky, that's right, yeah.
And I came. It's directed by Tom Calloway, also produced by Jeff Burr, oddly enough. And I had a supporting role in that. That's the first time I had ever been to Idyllwild, because it was in the festival, And backtracking, I got ahead of myself. Oh, so the strip bar. So Tom Calloway called me, who was a DP, and he was looking to direct, which obviously he did become a director, very good director. I've worked with him a few times, and he's still shooting too. He's still kind of a cool DP, but he likes to direct when he can. And he called me and said, "Hey, I got this company. They want me to direct something. Do you have anything that I could shoot, like on a low budget?" And I said, "Well, of course I do." I said, "Man, I got this strip bar movie that would be great, for this." And he said, "Well, let me read it." I said, "Well, you know what? Let me dig it up and we'll talk." This was like on a Monday, and I said, "We'll talk like next Monday." We'll meet up.
Let me write it first.
Right. I didn't tell him that.
Yeah.
Said, let me. So I sat down and wrote this thing, no outline or anything. I just started. I didn't know why the guy was there. I didn't know what the thing, and it just sort of, happened as I wrote it. It's just like, oh, that's why he's there. Like about page 20, I'm like, oh, okay, that's why he's here. And it just kind of, and I had this parallel story of these two bad cops going. So when I get bored with one story, I'd go to the cops. And I mean, I think I wrote it in 5 days and then walked away from it. And then I came back like maybe one day and kind of tinkered with it. And so I gave it to him and he liked it. He's like, oh man, this is perfect, And so he took it to this company and they hated it. They were like, this is the worst script we've ever read. They hate it. I'm like, wow, maybe I was wrong, So I stuck it in a drawer. And then I don't know time frame, but maybe a few months later, Dan Golden called me, who was a director I'd worked with at Corman before.
Right.
And he kind of knew me as a writer, I guess because of, I'm trying to think of the time frame here. This was post Eddie Presley. And so he's like, do you have any scripts laying around? And as a matter of fact, I did. I had two. I had another one I'd written right after Eddie Presley called The Other Kind, which was this movie about con artists. And I'd written that and nobody seemed interested in that. I mean, I didn't really have anybody to show it to. Again, I didn't have a literary agent, but I said, I got these two scripts and I got this one and I got the strip bar. He's like, whoa. What's the strip bar one? And the title is the best title I ever came up with. It was called Zipper's Clown Palace, which was obviously riffing on Jumbo's Clown Room. Right. And so I gave it, and this is really the way, I think I gave it to him. He read it that day. He gave it to Mike Elliott over at Corman's place, the producer over there. Mike read it, who gave it to Corman, who at least glanced at it, at least through it. And on the third day, they said, well, let's do it.
Wow.
And I was they offered me an insulting amount of money. But at the time, I was just about to shoot Tales from the Hood. They actually overlapped. They were shooting at the same time. And so finally we came to, it was still an insulting amount of money, but it was like less than I was making to be on hold
right.
for 1 week on Tales,
Right.
And I was like, all right, whatever. At least I'll have Roger Corman. I'll have his name on a poster, a movie that I wrote, That's cool. And so, I think from the time I gave Dan the script till the time they were burning film and I went down and helped cast it, I mean, I'd have to ask Dan, but it's something close, like maybe 10 days. I mean, they built a set and everything. Wow. Because that was kind of the whole point, is they had the soundstage available and nothing to shoot for this period of time.
Right.
And I think it was like an 8-day shoot, maybe 8 days with some pickups. It was most of the movie was shot in this strip bar. And so they shot they shot that movie, and it turned out pretty good. I mean, Dan did it under the circumstances. Dan did a good job. The downside of Corman, because it was like a low-level movie, he didn't put his name on it, which pissed me off. So that was the whole reason I've been over on the money. But anyway, so that movie got made, and at this point, I'm just kind of hanging out, and I'm working. I'm getting offers because of Pulp. I'm working and fairly consistently, going to Vegas a lot with my girlfriend, And Dan Golden calls me and he said, I just read this thing where Quentin's a big fan of my first movie, which is called Naked Obsession, another good title for a strip bar movie.
Right.
The William Cat movie. And he said, how could I get the movie to him? How could he get Strip Teaser? Corman changed the name. I think they'll confuse this with the Demi Moore movie, So he changed the name to Strip Teaser, which pissed me off.
Right.
But who am I? I didn't have any vote, And so I said, at the time, I was in touch with Quentin still, and I knew his assistant pretty well and everything. I was getting invited to events. I said, yeah. I sent it to his assistant. Here's her address, and tell her who you are and that I wrote the thing and blah, blah, blah. And so he did, and then nothing came of it. And again, I don't know what the time period was, but Quentin called me, and people had told me, "Hey, Quentin's going to call you." So I'm thinking, cool, another acting job, for Mr. Tarantino. And he called me and he said, "We're doing these Dusk Till Dawn sequels, and I really like Strip Teaser, and I showed it to Bob Weinstein, and which was my whole plan, was for him to go, why don't we get him to co-write this thing with Scott Spiegel, who was directing it." And I was like, sounds good to me, if it's okay with Scott, and who I knew just barely. I mean, we were acquainted, but, we weren't friends or anything. And he was up for it, because he was more of like a visual guy, and I was more of I think the junior version, like I was the Tarantino figure and he was the Rodriguez figure. You know what I mean?
Sure. Yeah.
And so that was kind of the idea. And that went on, it took forever to put it together because there's all kinds of rights issues. But we ended up doing the movie and, went and shot it in South. It was called Texas Blood Money, but they decided we were going to shoot in South Africa, which was interesting. And we did the movie, and it made a lot of money. It wasn't particularly loved by the critics but it was it did very, very well. It made Miramax a lot of money, and it sold out the world of the film market like the first day, and did very, very, very well. Played the shit out of cable, still does, and so that was my first kind of first and only kind of foray into corporate filmmaking. And I didn't really like it. It was always pressure, and it was, we were getting notes from 7 different people, and they were all conflicting, and, we didn't know who to listen to. And it was just kind of an unpleasant thing in that way, although it paid, very well.
Yeah.
And, that part of it I really liked, but by the end of it, I was like, I remember saying to somebody, I don't want to do that. I don't want to be one of these guys, because I was with a really good agent, or I was backing on Spiegel's agent. And I said, I don't want to be writing Children of the Corn 9. I just don't want to. It doesn't interest me, being a writer for art. And of course, I ended up, acting in Children of the Corn 9 for scale. So I taught myself a lesson on that. It's you got to be careful. Careful what you dodge. But that was kind of, and since then, I shouldn't say I'm always writing, but I've had stuff. We had a project that I had going that we were shooting on weekends, and my lead actor, had like a nervous breakdown and gained like 50 pounds and left town. So that was, it's not really my fault. And then I had another movie I was directing for a friend of mine, and they decided not, we shot a chunk of it, and his manager decided the script was really hot, and he was going to get $1 million for it.
Oh yeah. Typical.
That didn't happen. So I've had, directing things. I've also had writing things. I've done rewrites for people, and I've got
your career is you're just one of those guys, adapt or die. And that's one of the things I just always have admired about you, is just like, what needs to be done. You kind of know where you want to be on your journey. And, so I think that you are actually an inspiration to people who get into the business and realize that it kind of sucks in a lot of ways. And then you really realize why you're doing it. It has nothing to do with the business. It has nothing to do with fame or anything. It's you're an artist deep down. So anyway, we're going to have to close it out now. I'm running a little over my algorithm, but I love talking to you, man. I just love talking to you, and I'm going to have you on the podcast again, and I think we're going to have a good time at the Q&A. That's going to be fun. But
man, I'm looking forward to it. I guess if there's anything to be learned, the thing that I did right was, try to create my own opportunities, even if they weren't for me as an actor. I did a lot of things wrong, but I think that's one of the things that I was always sort of creating stuff, either for me to write, to direct, or to act in or something. I guess had I not sat down that night and wrote Eddie Presley, that kind of led to the whole thing. You can trace it straight to Quentin and straight to the Pulp Fiction and straight to.
Yeah, but you ended
right.
up out of necessity paddling your own canoe, and I think that's where the lesson is, But
yeah, I think that's what my cousin said. He said if you had to sit down that night on your Big Chief tablet, which I just found they started making Big Chief tablets again. You're talking about politically incorrect.
Yeah,
but it's true. Had I not done that, I don't know. I don't know what would have happened. But it would have certainly been a completely different path. I might still have done okay. I don't know, but nobody was. I saw like some seminar one time. I think it was the Duplass brother, however you pronounce, and the title of it was "The Cavalry is Not Coming."
That's good.
There's too many people, sitting around waiting. Oh, we just need 3 million. Well, just 3 million.
Yeah.
Good luck with that.
Good luck.
You've never made a movie, but they're going to give you 3 million.
Yeah, I always
Paul Schrader can't get 3 million. Why would they give it to you?
Yeah, I always love that kind of cockeyed optimism. But
yeah, as long as you're kind of trying to at least creatively have some say so in your destiny. At least I think that's a step in the right direction, and that is probably the thing I did right.
Yeah.
If I had to pinpoint one thing, the reason that I'm still standing is probably mainly because of that. Those things I did in the beginning like that.
Yeah. Well, that's going to wrap it up for us today, but I want to thank my friend Duane Whitaker for coming on yet again. And after this talk, I'm like, when can I have him back on? Because I've never done talking. It's always fun to have you on, man. I'm looking forward to seeing you.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. You wouldn't believe it, but I don't do podcasts.
Yeah,
so
I know. I'm looking forward to seeing you.
Get me on there, you can't shut me up, but I really don't do them.
No, that's why I appreciate it. And I am looking forward to seeing you at Idyllwild in a couple months. And just a reminder, you can follow the podcast on Facebook and Instagram, and of course listen wherever you find your favorite podcasts. And I hope to see some of you at the Idyllwild International Festival of Cinema. I got a 100-film screening March 5th through the 10th from over 16 countries. And next year we have our big expansion going on where we're going to be bumping up to 225 films. Because we finally have the venues to do that in our little village. But for now, we're just going to have a great time this year. And so for my guests, the great Duane Whitaker, and myself and my producer, Trinity Houston, thanks for listening, and we will see you next time. Thanks a lot, Duane.
Thank you.